chapter 4.2, part 3. So we're connecting with the gods still. We're under that subheading. And this particular piece is called an icon, I-C-O-N. And the definition, as I should mention, many of the definitions in this book are off to the sides. If you look at the top of page 582, there'll be, if you have the hard copy of the book, the icon, and it will give you the definition, which is a religious image venerated by believers. So there's all kinds of vocabulary. It's usually in bold print, and then if you're not finding it immediately on that page, then you can go to the glossary section in the book and see the intro to the course videos for more information about how to navigate the ebook. Okay, so we're looking at this icon, and this is a small portable religious image. And this one's kind of large for an icon. This is 30 inches high by 21 inches wide. A lot of these are smaller than a piece of paper. So this is about twice the size of piece of paper, a little more. And it's tempera on panel. We're in the Middle Ages, 12th century, before 1132, and this is called the Virgin of Vladimir. And there's gold leaf usually all around here. Our textbook is saying that everything except for the faces has been redone or repainted, partly because, similar to what I was saying about the African sculpture, people would touch them to connect with the spirit world, with God. So saints and mythological figures interact with God to provide role models to help educate viewers about religious practices. That's on page 582, I'm quoting here. And in the Middle Ages, artwork would travel a fair bit. This particular piece has been in Moscow since 1395, but many of these would have been painted from Constantinople, and in the Byzantine Empire. And this style sort of continues on into the Middle Ages, if that makes sense. And they were not worshipped themselves, but as a conduit to God. And they're worshipped in the way, almost the way that reliquaries or relics were worshipped, that it would be like a bone of a saint or something like a piece of cloth from, from Christ, the Passion of the Christ, that kind of thing. But they had intense reverence, and they were thought to have spread goodness, just the artwork itself. So it's a little interesting because there are time periods in Christianity where there is no depiction of God or no depiction of anything figurative, any of Mary or anyone else. And there are other times as well where the idea that you would think something was holy itself would be anathema to Christian beliefs, but in this particular case, it's a little bit of East mixed with West, if you will, because this is toward the eastern end of the Christian Byzantine Empire going into the Middle Ages. Okay, so there had to be traditional rules. These all look really similar. There's no copies per se, but there are all these different artists cranking these out, but it would be very linear. There's sort of like a flatness to this piece, a little bit of overlapping with the child on top of the Virgin Mary, but mostly they're quite flat, not very realistic looking faces or body dimensions. If you look at this child's head, it's very much like an adult, where it would be small relative to the body, but it's even smaller than that. For the Christ child, but there would be a halo with this gold sort of area around Mary, and it would be depicted in a certain style. So they all stylistically look real similar, but none of the facial features or the folds of the fabric, that kind of thing, really look identical. That part could be very different. Okay, then we can move on to Bernini. This is quite a different style of artwork. The Renaissance, the end of the Middle Ages happened, we get into the Renaissance, and now we get into the Baroque era. And when people tend to look at a sculpture and they don't know for sure, or a painting that is Renaissance or Baroque, Baroque is usually over the top and movement. There's movement going on. You can see a lot of these flowing garments. You can see the expressiveness in St. Teresa's face and all this flowing fabric. Then we know that more than likely it is Baroque. And also we have a multitude of materials happening here. We have, some gilt bronze. We have marble back here. We have stone here, or inlaid marble over here, probably a pattern here, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. This is also underneath a window, and in some textbooks they cite this as the first piece of installation art, in that it was echoing with these rays of sunlight in the gilded bronze, that it's echoing the sunlight coming from an actual window up here, which we can't see. So lots of different textures here in this carved piece. It's amazing to think that this is stone because it's so fluid. We're depicting Saint Teresa in her ecstasy. She was pierced by an angel, and she was sorry. I've looked at this piece so much, and it was very personal to me, and I get a little bit emotional. But it's one of her mystic visions, and this arrow pierced her heart, and she felt divine love. So it's kind of interesting where he almost looks Cupid-like with an arrow, and it's entirely possible that in this sense, the Christian merging from the Renaissance, merging with some of the Greek and Roman classical ideals here with our depiction here, with this angel starting to look a little bit like Cupid. Pierces her heart. She experiences ecstasy. The Catholic Church is now, at this point in time in the Baroque era, trying to establish a stronger relationship between the person and Christ, as opposed to an intermediary such as a priest or a monk. So literacy is starting to happen. People are reading the Bible themselves. So this is something experiential that they're trying to inspire other, people in the congregation, that they could have such a divine, inspired moment. It's very theatrical, and intensity of her piety serves as an example to be followed by the devout. So you'd see this, it's in a church, you would see this and you would say, oh man, that's just amazing. I want to be like St. Teresa. I want to experience divine love. So it's inspirational in that way. Okay, so now we're going to get into the judgment and the afterlife. In Egyptian culture, which you have to think of, the artwork that we're going to see lasts for 3,000 years, the longest single period of art. It has some segments that it gets broken up into. There are some shifts stylistically, but for the most part, the entire 3,000 years, we see this profile face, and the arms are sideways, the feet are sideways, and then the body is frontal. So no matter what we're looking at throughout those 3,000 years, we can identify it as Egyptian because we know, aside from the hairstyles and the gods that are part animal and part human and so on, we know from the body gesture, the way the figures are placed, we know that's Egyptian. Okay, so this is the last judgment before Osiris, and this is 1275 before the Common Era. So this is over 3,000 years old at the British Museum. And what we're looking at is our friend here who has passed away, Hunefer, and he is going to be judged. So he's being held by the hand, moving into the area here where his soul is going to be weighed. And lost my train of thought. So this is his Book of the Dead. So this is his particular book, and where he's being judged. Anubis. I'm sorry, I was getting tongue-tied. So Anubis is leading him into the judgment area, and our scales are here. Anubis, in another figuration, is the weigher. His heart is here in a canopic jar, perhaps, and then a feather is over here. his heart, meaning his soul, is lighter than the feather, so he's good to go. He gets to go into the afterlife in a good way, and he's proven worthy. So this also up here are some judges. There are 14 of them. They're to represent 44 judges that would be looking over his scroll and looking over his life, and to figure out whether or not he's worthy of a good afterlife. He's pleading his case, right? The last one in this segment that we're going to look at in the afterlife is going to be Gizilbertus, Last Judgment. Again, we're back into the Middle Ages. I know it skips around a little bit, but we're trying to make the point of the spirituality in the art, not so much of the periods. But you see these elongated figures in the Middle Ages, and you see this lack of gravity with them. They're not really landing anywhere. He's not really standing on anything, if that makes sense. So in the Last Judgment, over here we see people who are doing well, and that they're going to reach heaven. And then over here, these people who have sinned, they are, suffering. And this is over a doorway in this cathedral in France. And many times you'll see this similar, if you think about this, it's very similar to our pediment with the Greeks with that triangular setup. This is a domed, curved area here, an archway over the doorway, but very similar in terms of stylistic structure, where the central figure would be quite tall and then the secondary figures would be off to the sides. So this is our Last Judgment here. And then the pair of hands are showing the from Christ's right, the souls that are blessed, and the Christ left, the scales that have and the ravaged bodies of the damned. So it's usually, in this one isn't as intense as some of them are, but sometimes you will just see some really atrocious things happening over into the ones that are judged poorly are going to hell, and you'll see like animals eating them and all kinds of things. But again, you're dealing with illiteracy. You have to make the point that you will be judged and you want to live a good life. Oh, I apologize. This is the last one in the series. So in Vermeer's piece here, in 1664, he is showing a person, a very simple woman, a woman holding the balance. So this balance is very similar to representing the judgment of souls in the end. Will you make it to heaven? And if you look behind her, there's a painting of the Last Judgment, and you can see the picture of God here judging these different figures here. So she's holding the empty, perfectly balanced scales, but she's suggesting that one's possessions that one's actions are more important than one's possessions. If you see over here, she's not weighing her possessions and trying to get into heaven in that way. So it's a subtle inclusion of religion, that painting that's behind her, symbolic with her scales, and they're empty, and so it's actions, not possessions.